Good morning again. So you all should be seeing in a moment an image of Jesus. There you go. Jesus calming the storm. Take a look at that image for a moment. That image is from a church next to the Sea of Galilee. And there's a couple things I love about it. The fact that there's two Jesuses. You have the Jesus sleeping and the Jesus awake. And then there's only two disciples in the boat. So it's very compact. But it does create a beautiful visual. Okay. Hold that in mind, not to that slide yet, but hold the other one in mind as I get underway here. And we can take that slide down if we want for this section. So one day he got into a boat with his disciples and he said to them, "Let us go across to the other side of the lake." So they put out, and while they were sailing, he fell asleep. A windstorm swept down the lake and the boat was filling with water and they were in danger. They went to him and woke him up shouting, "Master, Master, we are perishing." And he woke up and rebuked the wind and the raging waves. They ceased, and there was a calm. He said to them, "Where is your faith?" They were afraid and amazed and said to one another, "Who is this then, that he commands even the winds and the water, and they obey him?" So that painting was coming into my mind as I thought about the state of the conference, that painting and this passage from Luke. A year ago in August, we were in this place. It seems like yesterday to me. This was the strangest year, the longest year and the shortest year at the same time. I think some of you understand what I mean by that. But last year in August, the last time that I was with you, I ended my talk by sharing an image about the Penn Central Conference as a fleet of boats of many different sizes, conditions, crews, capacity, and more. And I talked about Jesus as the admiral of the fleet, the one who ultimately sets our course, and how the fleet is moving together while each boat is on its own in its autonomy. We are moving together, and how we can be of greater assistance to each other in this journey forward as a fleet, because we are a fleet, because we are in covenant with one another. So the next slide is an image of, this is from St. Paul's in Somerville, Pennsylvania, the ship on the waters, the boat on the waters, and this has been on my mind all year as I think about the things that we have been through. The journey this past year has been a challenging one. We have been confronted with continued pandemic woes and grief. We have faced our own historical and current racism. We have known political turmoil and the ongoing aftermath of all of those things. We have been at times in becalmed waters when nothing appeared to be moving. At other times, we were in churning seas and there seemed to be whirlpools all around us. Through all of this, I saw our communities working to adapt and adjust by setting an anchor, changing our crews, selling our boats in one case, sharing our crews with others, and of course, engaging or not with the onboard compass, sextant, ship-to-shore communication, or internet. Our captains, our clergy and lay leaders, were on a steep learning curve, and the results were remarkable. They were remarkable. Talk about adaptation and going the extra nautical mile. I hope every congregation has expressed their thanks to their captains for the time that they helped to bring us through this past year. All of these people who were at the helm and helped to guide us. I also saw our ship captains exhausted, anxious, depressed, weeping and frustrated. Many of those captains now are in need of shore leave. Please give it to them. Churches in the Penn Central Conference, I hope that this summer will be a time of restoration and shore leave for your captains. Please, please give it to them. The Penn Central Conference staff responded in a variety of ways. Now, I've put on the annual meeting site a staff report that we put together. It's like 5 pages long of everything that we did since last August and a little bit before. And I'm not going to go through all of those things because you can read those on your own, but you can see what the staff has been doing in the past year. But all of our staff pivoted. We know that's the word for 2020, right? All of our staff pivoted to establish new ways of connection and support. I'm humbled to work with such an amazing, remarkable team of people, and there is no one else, besides my husband, that I'd rather spend a pandemic with. It has indeed been a difficult year. Even in the midst of that turmoil, we prayed to Jesus for aid, called upon the Holy Spirit, and trusted God to guide us. And now here we are looking toward a newer horizon, we hope with fewer clouds brewing. So what can we say about the state of the conference? I want to start by taking a giant step backward and going up to about a 30,000-foot view. Many of you grew up in the Penn Central Conference. This is one of the things that I have learned, particularly living in Lancaster. You're a newcomer if you're only third generation in Lancaster. I'm not kidding. And those of you out there know what I'm talking about. But many of you grew up in this conference, or you've been working here as part of your ministry or your career for a long time. You've seen it change over time and adapt to new challenges and realities. I want to consider what some of those changes have been. When I was hired and then called to this position, one of the things that I had to promise as an aspect of my acceptance was that I commit to being transparent in all aspects of what's happening with the conference. For us, as we look forward in our small fleet of boats, we need to know what our status is, because that reality, the social and demographic position we're in, which I'm going to show you, will influence what we do and how we approach our task. So the next slide is a graph. It shows you Penn Central Conference total weekly worship attendance since 1995. Since 1995, our worship numbers have declined from around 23,000 people worshiping weekly to just over 9,000, which may still be a little bit high. Worshiping patterns have changed, certainly. However, this decline is due more to the changing number of churches and the changing sizes of our churches. When I think about the true number of active members in the Penn Central Conference, this is the number that I use, because we all know that those who attend worship regularly, which in some cases now is once a month, is how we define regular, are far more likely to volunteer to serve on boards, committees, special projects, mission work, and the like. The next slide will show us our average weekly worship attendance. This one is really important for us. It reflects something dramatic in terms of the lives of our local churches. In 1995, the mean worship attendance per church was 110. 110. Obviously, that means that some churches were much larger and some were smaller to get to the mean. But in 2020, that number was 51. 51. I want you to sit with this number just for a moment. Be aware of how it makes you feel. Those of you who were in the conference in 1995, and I know there are a lot of them out there who are listening today, Remember what it felt like then, don't you? These numbers now can generate grief, which we have to take seriously and we have to look at. The next slide will give you something else to consider that may be bringing an even greater sense of grief because it's more dramatic. This is the number of Penn Central Conference confirmations. This slide shows a drop from 675 confirmations in 1995. 675 confirmations to 40 in 2020. And that's not just pandemic results. Just prior to pandemic, it was 80. So this shows us something. If I showed you the national UCC graph for Christian education engagement, you would see something very similar. The numbers in the case of Christian education, engagement, confirmation have declined enormously, enormously. The patterns of engagement of youth have changed. We know that. We've talked about that. But the other dynamic we often don't consider is the change in our birth rate. The number of children born to mainline Protestant families is significantly less now than it was in the 1970s and the 1980s. We do not have enough children to take our places. The birth rate for evangelical churches, that is independent evangelical churches, Southern Baptists, etc., and Roman Catholics remains higher. However, they are also seeing a decline in their membership, not as steep, but it's happening. And in the Roman Catholic Church, the decline is quite steep. It's offset by immigration. Lest you think that the Penn Central Conference is an anomaly within the United Church of Christ regarding numbers, the national numbers are directly parallel. And the next slide shows that. The next slide isn't there. But you know what? That's okay. It's okay because peace be still is a good thing to think about right now. But let me tell you what that national membership slide said. In 1959, when the United Church of Christ had been together for 2 years, it had 2.2 million members. In 2019, we had 802,000. And that number is based on members who have died, transferred out to a non-UCC church, or the result of cleaning up church rolls. It has nothing to do with churches that have closed. Okay? 1959, we started with 8,253 churches. In 2019, we had 4,852. Now we need to look at the painting. I want to state again that I know how these numbers impact many of us, and the grief has to be taken seriously. I have shared these numbers at many of the association meetings this spring, although the PCC numbers I just received recently from National. We are caught in a web of decline that stretches across the country and includes millions of faithful people. Millions of faithful people. There is a time for grief, which is important, but there's also a time for hope. Not the hope that we can rebuild and bring them back, but a hope rooted in the trust that God is with us, that there is someone on the helm of all of our ships saying, "Peace, be still," and that the gospel is alive in our midst. Numbers are important for getting a clear 30,000-foot view of our whole context, but numbers have driven us for a long time and not always in the best way. We have often asked, are we growing in numbers, instead of asking, are we faithful to the gospel? I will boldly say that we cannot judge the effectiveness of the gospel by our numbers. The numbers reveal part of our reality, but they do not reveal all of it. After all, the numbers of Christians grows around the globe and holds steady in many areas. And truly, the Christianity only became truly global, that is, when it finally encompassed the African continent, in the 20th century. So I do not fear the loss of Christianity. Instead, in our context, we have to measure the effectiveness of our work in the gospel by the lives that are reborn, healed, fed, and made whole because of the knowledge of Jesus Christ through our work and our words. And we do that work because we are called to as disciples, and we do it without thinking of the cost. So how do we respond to this? We might want to throw in the towel. I have known some people, actually, who say to me, the whole thing's lost. It's over. The church is done. Nothing will be as it was. The reality is too changed, too different, too challenging. Not so. Not so. When I look around the conference, I still see boats of all different sizes, some in excellent condition, standing in one, actually, with amazing ship-to-shore communication, I have to say. Excellent condition. Some of them needing some work. Some need a little new paint, others new sails or a new engine. Some are looking for a new captain. But every single one of our churches, our boats, every single one has a crew that loves the boat and loves God. Every single one of them. So while we're a smaller fleet and our crews have diminished somewhat in size, we are faithful. Faithful in crews of 18 and faithful in crews of 150. So what we require now are tools for navigation. Good compasses, sextants, and maps. We have to be focused and intentional with our navigational tools. And these tools, I believe, should point us toward a horizon of thriving. Thriving, not simply surviving, but thriving. Thriving churches have good captains, lay and clergy, a clear mission, strong prayer lives, and are pervaded by a sense of joy demonstrated through laughter. I really believe the church that laughs together is a vibrant church, because laughter in church is indicative of much more that's going on under the surface. Thriving is a horizon for us, not numerical growth. If numerical growth is a byproduct, which it is for some of our churches, there is numerical growth going on out there. If numerical growth happens, it's a byproduct, that's great. But thriving does not guarantee a growth in membership. Does not guarantee that. Now, the conference is the boats. When people say to me, well, the conference is trying to tell us what to do. I say, okay, we need to make a distinction between the conference staff and the conference, because the conference are the churches. That is the conference. If we don't have the churches, we have no conference. That's how it's put together. Our covenant is what makes us a fleet. That's what makes us a fleet. Otherwise, we would all be independent boats going whichever way we want, which is the reality for many churches in the United States. But in the United Church of Christ, we have, at some point, every single one of our churches in the Penn Central Conference at some point has committed to be part of this covenant. They have chosen to be a part of this fleet. Now, I know there are some out there on the margins, and I try to visit some of those on the margins and say, we really want you to stay in the fleet, because we really do. But we have all chosen that at some point historically. The conference staff enable the communications, affirm connections, stay in touch with captains and crews, assist when needed, and the board overruns the funding. Overruns. Sorry about that. The board oversees the running and the funding of the fleet. Yes. Okay, we'll pay for that one later. The Penn Central Conference navigational map needed to be updated. To do so, the Strategic Plan Task Force was formed. We started by looking at our mission and what the staff and the board actually do. We affirm the following mission to guide us: proclaiming the wisdom of Jesus Christ and affirming our covenant with one another. The Penn Central Conference of the United Church of Christ guides and nurtures our clergy, congregations, and covenanted ministries in discovering their God-inspired mission and a path for their future. Nurtures, supports, guides. In addition to the mission statement, we articulated our values, noting this: we commit to establishing a Christ-centered culture of accountability in all covenantal relationships, excellence in lay and clergy education and leadership, and adaptability to changing circumstances. I'm not going to go through the whole strategic plan with you, so do not worry. It is posted on the website. You can go and look at it. It may be of use to you as you look at your own strategic plan. But our strategic plan takes those three vision elements, accountability, excellence, and adaptability, and puts them into practice through specific goals and objectives. We believe that all three will motivate us to move forward for at least the next 3 years, and our goals and objectives will benefit the churches and clergy of the conference. If you want a copy of the plan, again, you may find it on the website. I'm happy to send you one. I'm happy to talk to you about it if you wish to. We want to be a strong and healthy conference. So I'm going to give you just 3 quick ideas of things that come out of the strategic plan that we hope and we believe will do this. Under excellence in leadership, and I should note that of the 3 vision elements, excellence in leadership has like 10 goals, and that's a lot, because it includes all of our continuing education, which we feel very passionately about. And under our excellence in leadership, we do have a goal to provide robust clergy continuing education. That sounds very good, right? But it may sort of sound like, yeah, well, everybody does continuing education, da, 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 da. But it's not. It's not the typical clergy education. When we gather as a group to read White Too Long by Robert Jones in a book group, or when we take on atonement and salvation in a theological roundtable, doesn't that sound great? We do more than offer fellowship. There's more happening here. We push ourselves to speak across difference and within difference. And we do have that in Penn Central. It's one of our hallmarks, which I actually affirm. The better we can do this with each other, the better we can do it within our churches. So the more experience we have being able to sit and lean into the really uncomfortable conversations or the really intellectually challenging conversations and see the differences in our theological perspectives, the more we can do that, the better we can do that and model that and lead that for our churches. Churches that truly embrace the UCC motto, wherever you are on life's journey, you are welcome here, which I will say, not everyone does by a long shot. To actually live into that motto takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of work. But the ones who do are vital, theologically diverse, politically diverse gatherings. But they require reflective pastors and lay leaders to model how to get there, how to host it and hold it. If nothing else, I believe that the Penn Central Conference must model to the entire United Church of Christ what it can look like to live with rich, fertile differences, especially theological, and thrive. Because, friends, this is what the world needs of us. And the theological heritage of this conference is a gift to the United Church of Christ. It is a gift that we are responsible for continuing to keep alive and keep giving to the wider denomination. Another goal from within excellence in leadership is to seek and foster partnerships to share resources. This goal includes the objective of facilitating conversations between or among churches interested in shared ministry. Make no mistake, this is our future. 60% of our churches worship under 50 on a Sunday. We are a little church conference. We also have those who worship over 100, which to me still is just an amazing idea. 100 people in worship. We do have churches that have over 100 in worship. But our future as a small church conference means that we have to be willing to share resources. Now, Marisa and the church empowerment team are already exploring and assisting churches with this. Marisa and I are also working with the Lutheran leadership to encourage shared clergy and shared resources. And you know, the bishop said to me, why haven't we done this before? Why haven't we had this conversation before? The time is now for this. They are our natural partners. Since we don't have very many Disciples of Christ churches in the area, the Lutherans are our natural partners, and they have been historically. Under the vision element of adaptability, we have the goal of facilitating an outdoor ministries program, which has a whole bunch of objectives to it, which look great. One of those is the creation of an endowment from the sale of Hartman Center, which you'll hear about a little bit later, to support outdoor and creation-oriented ministry throughout the entire conference, in the forms of grants to churches, to individuals, groups of individuals. That's an example of adaptation and of our covenantal responsibilities. I would love to see Penn Central Conference become a creation justice-oriented conference with creation care at the center of our actions. I would love to see that. I would also love to see 10 churches in the next year plant gardens. I would love to put that out there as a challenge, whether it's 3 foot by 3 feet. This is what my husband says. If you could just have 3 by 3 feet, you'd be really happy. Yes? 3 by 3 in the sun, 10 churches, plant a garden. We'll show you how. We'll tell you how. So those are just 3 goals out of a total of 15 that we have set in the strategic plan. Again, I'm happy to share it with you. It's an evolving, living document that we will engage consistently. It is our map. And I didn't say earlier, but I will say now, if you have questions or comments as I'm speaking that you want to hear an answer to at the end, send them in the chat. If you've got a question about the strategic plan, don't hesitate. But finally, I want to come down to the local church. What about the local churches? What about us? Our churches. Every member of the staff is a member of a local church. We do not exist on our own boat. The conference is not a separate boat. It's not the admiral's boat in the front. We are each on a boat. We are part of the conference. The churches of 15 members and those of 300. How do you set your course in these waters now? We operate within a covenantal system, as Nora said earlier, with that amazing image of the grapevine, and I have been in one of those arbors, and it is complex. Being in covenant assumes mutual care and responsibility. It's a difficult system to uphold and can be frustrating and enlivening. Nora and I can tell you about how much of our conversation in history and polity is about our aspect of living in covenant, what that means and what it doesn't mean. The shorthand is that we are responsible for one another. None of us is in this fleet alone, although I will say I understand that there are those who feel that they have been alone and that they are alone. We will continue, and we are committed to work on that. to try to make sure that everyone feels that they are part of this fleet. So what can local churches do to move toward that horizon of thriving? The first thing is to pray. 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 And then pray again. Our connection with God has to be at the center of everything we do. It has to be. It has to be. Engaging in prayer is akin to looking at the North Star. It's how we are oriented. It is how we orient our work. There are ways to build the prayer capacity in your churches. The prayer practices. The churches that have been taking on contemplative prayer as a practice. There are ways to do this. The staff and I can point you in the right direction. There are places that will help us develop the prayer lives of our churches. A church without a strong prayer life will founder. It will. Second, consult our maps carefully, and we may find in our local churches that we need a new one. Maps do become outdated. They do. If you need a strategic plan, even a little one, there are such things as little strategic plans. It can be short. It can have 3 goals that's manageable for a congregation of 15 people as a way to look to the horizon. We can help you with that too. Without a recent and engaging plan, we will drift. We will drift. The map allows us to focus on our mission and clarify where we go with our mission. Third, consider the state of our boats. And these are some of my challenges to us. The first is your history. Why were you built? Why were you built? Every single person in every single congregation should be able to answer, where did this church come from? Who built it? Why? Why did they build it? And why are we here now? History matters. History really does matter. Everyone should know the history of their own community and be ready to share it. If someone were to say to you, so where did this church come from? Oh, there were some Germans. We need to be able to go beyond that, okay? We need to know the faith. We need to know the faith that brought them here and that helped them build it. The second piece in the state of our boats is the physical state, the actual physical structure. Does it need mending? How much does it need? Can it be salvaged? Do you need to sell it? Is it too big for the crew to manage? That's one we see a lot these days. Is it full of holes? The physical structure is central to so many of us. So many of us. We need to make sure that it will be in good shape for the voyage ahead. It's important. And we need to acknowledge when it won't work anymore. Your internal structure. What are your nautical rules? That is your bylaws. Anybody who's hung around me knows I have a thing about bylaws, and I'm going to say it again and again. If you have not revisited your bylaws, please do that. You need to do that. They provide the framing for your boat. They talk about what the structure is of your organization. They also allow you to have virtual meetings legally. So that part's important. We need to update that. The propulsion. What moves you? Where is the gospel in our messaging? How do we specifically proclaim, each of us, in our own way, on our own boat, specifically proclaim the love of Jesus, the love of God, and a message of salvation? And I use that word intentionally because I know that in many of our churches, that word is understood differently, it's reflected on differently, it's embraced differently. However we define what our salvation is or where it comes from and how with Jesus. Everyone should be able to answer that question too. Because that question should be part of what it means to be part of this boat. Why am I here at Mount Zion? Why am I here? Why am I here in East Petersburg, which is where I go? Why are we here? What are we preaching? What is our propulsion? What's pushing us into the world? The gospel. But how? How? And finally, consider very carefully the state of our crews. That is, those who are working tirelessly on those boats. A Navy colleague told me that if there's not a sense of team in the crew, they fail. He said it doesn't matter if the boat is full of holes. What matters is that there's a sense of teamwork in the crew, that they are all working together, that they are all responsible for each other, that they are all responsible for that boat. That deep connection and care, the belief that we are one. Unity, not uniformity, unity allows us to navigate the most difficult waters and weather the most difficult storms. That is our lived covenant. This last slide that I have is from St. Cecilia Catholic Church in Detroit, Michigan. Beautiful image of Jesus in glory. And friends, our fleet may not grow in number. Right now, we're about 177 churches. We may not grow in number, but we can grow in resiliency, in spiritual depth and maturity, in wisdom, in love, and in serving. We can. In other words, we can thrive. We can thrive. And I want to thank you for the incredible honor of serving this remarkable fleet in these days. Thank you.